You're listening to Thunderquack Podcast Network.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Metaphysical Fiction. This is episode 4, where we are going to take a look at the summer blockbuster hit Jurassic Park. I am, as always, one of the hosts, Karl and I'm joined with our faithful compatriot, Michael Cohen. Hey, what's going on, Mike?
I'm excited to talk about Jurassic Park.
I know you are. I think we both can attest to our love of dinosaurs, as can so many people.
Yeah.
So, as we were kind of thinking about, well, what are we going to do next? Because, we started this whole thing with an idea of really kind of sinking our teeth into a lot of the Marvel movies. And so far we haven't hit any actual Marvel movie.
Yeah.
At WandaVision and a little bit of Star Wars, and that's kind of it. But, it's that summer, got that summer feeling in the air. And I've been thinking a lot about summer blockbusters, and Jurassic Park was the first summer blockbuster of my lifetime. I imagine probably yours as well. Obviously, Steven Spielberg kicked off summer blockbusters with Jaws many years before that. But this movie specifically, especially the first Jurassic Park, really built out this world of wonder for mass audiences. And it's, this movie is now over 30 years old, if my math is correct, which it's probably not. But this movie is just so beloved by so many people. And while I think in a lot of ways, as acting as a summer blockbuster, I don't think its primary intention was to necessarily impart some deep life lesson. But that said, the fact that it's an enduring story, there's something embedded within the story itself that I think does try to impart some sort of lesson, or at least it imparts something that keeps drawing us back in. And for me, Mike, it's the concept of wonder. To me, the movie is all about being filled with wonder, and how sometimes wonderful things can also be terrifying things, right? So sometimes there's this intermixing of wonder and terror. And while I was thinking about this, it immediately made me think of one of my favorite works that I read back when I was in college. Is we read a book called The Idea of the Holy by a German religious studies philosopher, Rudolf Otto. And he talks about how ultimately experiences of the holy, the divine, God, whatever you want to call them, always kind of has these two experiences of both wonder and terror, and that they kind of coexist, right? We live in a very binary world, which is not necessarily such a great thing, where we have to think of some like wonder and terror as mutually exclusive and therefore non-complementary. But in the sense of religious experiences, and we're talking intense religious experiences. We're not talking just like a nice feeling you had at church on Sunday morning. Not to belittle that, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about like those holy crap, I just saw God in the flesh, or like, something totally not of this world in a way. And I think in a way, Jurassic Park reminds us of the importance of those experiences. Now, that said, I'm not trying to say that the dinosaurs are gods, or that the experience of Alan Grant and Ellie Sattler and Ian Malcolm was encountering a holy divine other there on the park. But I think that there's something about the theme of music, and I think this is a very Steven Spielberg aspect, which is reminding us how important it is to live with wonder, and how life-giving and how life finds new ways in the face of wonder. And I think that's such a great, powerful message that this movie has built right into its DNA, if you will. And, I think there is just so much there that is so important to remember. And I think there's a lot of And it's interesting because when you I'm recently coming off of a reread of the novel as well, and the novel and the movie could not, in a lot of ways, could not be more different. And to me, the heart of the novel is really a cautionary tale of messing with science, right? That
Yeah.
kind of the hubris of thinking that science can create and do whatever we deem it to do.
Yeah.
John Hammond's character specifically is just he's a little man, literally in the book, like he's described as a very short man. And that littleness of his stature mirrors the littleness of his ego, right? And his desire to create, to just make a name for himself. Whereas John Hammond in the movie is this delightful grandfather like figure who
Yeah.
wants the world to be able to be filled with wonder again. So it's interesting. I was rereading the book with a friend of mine, and my friend, for instance, loves the book and prefers it to the movie, and that's, it's totally fine. Again, to me, they have a lot of similarities, but they're very different stories. And
They're
so
so different. It's not fair to compare them in that way.
exactly.
Yeah.
But that said, like, I prefer the message of the movie to the message of the book, because the message of the book is ultimately kind of a pessimistic one.
Mm-hmm.
Everything ends on a downbeat in that book, right? There's no hope. Like, it's just like, oh crap, like our hubris will always destroy us. Whereas the movie ends, like, I love the closing shot of that movie where they're flying off on the helicopter, and Alan looks out the window and sees, I don't know what kind of bird that is, but it's a bird, a flock of birds flying, and he smiles, and the music swells, right? That beautiful John Williams music.
Yeah.
And to me, it's this reminder that wonder still exists in our world, and it's important not to try to recapture something that's dead and gone. you know and I think that's kind of the mistake of John Hammond in Jurassic Park. Isn't I mean, there's certainly hubris in it, and that's pointed out by Ian Malcolm in both the novel and the movie. It's much more heavily hit on in the novel, of course, but you know I think for what John Hammond was trying to accomplish is he wanted to, you know, bring something magical into the world. And what is more magical and wonderful, especially in the eyes of children, than dinosaurs?
Mm-hmm.
So let me bring that back into existence. But I think the sad truth is when you try to recapture wonder by recreating something from the past, it usually doesn't have great results, right? And in a weird way, Mike, it literally makes me think of Maz Kanata's line in Force Awakens, which is, right, the belonging we seek is not behind us, it is ahead, right? I would say the same is true of wonder. If something could have filled you with wonder and then it goes out of existence. So it's important not to just try to rebuild that or recreate that, but rather to look into ways that, how does wonder evolve? And I think that's what the closing shot of that movie ultimately is wonder still exists in our world. It's just evolved. So how do we make space to refine it and to allow it to have, an importance in our lives? And that's what I really love about the movie. And, you know, there are a lot of great interviews out there with Steven Spielberg talking about why he chose to go this route with the movie. And from the sounds of things, he and Michael Crichton were buddies back in the day.
Yeah.
And Michael Crichton kind of told him about this idea that he had for this book, and ultimately Jurassic Park. And Steven Spielberg was immediately like, I want to make that into a movie. And what's interesting is Michael Crichton did write the initial screenplay for the first movie, but they chose not to use it. And I don't know the details of that first screenplay, but I imagine it was more similar to the book. And Steven Spielberg is famous for saying that he ultimately wanted to tell a story as if he was a child again, right? Like imagining dinosaurs as a child is something pure and wonderful. And that's what he wanted to bring to the screen. So I think that's why the movie goes that route. I mean, it's literally Steven Spielberg saying to us, look how wonderful these creatures are. Look how wonderful nature itself can be. And it's important that we have wonder in our life,
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's such a big difference between the text and the film, just in that core. The original text, like the book, the beginning of every chapter starts with like these really weird. They're excerpts from Ian Malcolm's book, on chaos theory, and there's like almost like a graphic, like a diagram. It's a graphical representation of the chaos effect, to help you understand what they're talking about. And that really, like, that's the through line through both books, because it reoccurs in the Lost World as well. This whole through line of chaos theory, and that, like, complex systems close up, right? Like when we're looking too closely, they appear simple, but the further you pull back, the more complex you see the system is, and the more weird aberrations you can point out, right?
Mm.
Because, like, when you look really close in the pattern, you're like, oh, it's just a bunch of triangles, and then you pull back a little bit further and it's like, oh, why is there a square over there though? Right? And it's like you pull back even further and you see that there are all of these weird chaos factors, like further out, that the model, like a computer model at that point in time, certainly couldn't really predict,
Yeah.
right? And that's all sort of going into that idea of science as a form of control, as an expression of the human need to attain power, right? And all of that is reflected very much in the movie by Ian Malcolm's character in the lunch scene after they've seen the Brachiosaurus, and then the the Velociraptor pen, right? And his whole speech about, like, it's like you're a child who's found his father's gun, right? I And like the standing on shoulders of giants, etc. I like they sum it up there, and then we revisit it a moment later, a few, like about 20-30 minutes later, in the Jeep, when Malcolm explains chaos theory to Ellie. And it's like this very simple uh, uh, sort of exercise to explain that, like, you can't predict what's going to happen. Systems are too complex. Like, we don't have the ability to do it. But they never really get into it. And then towards the end of the movie, when Ellie and Hammond are in the the cafeteria or whatever, and they're eating the ice cream, and he's like, when we have control again, and she's like, that's the illusion. And that's all there, but it's really hard to, especially for a kid, to wrap your head around that stuff. And I guarantee that, like, Crichton had way more of that in his screenplay, because that's what Jurassic Park is about to him, right? The dinosaurs are actually just like they're an analogy for, like this idea that humans think that they can control nature. And
Mm.
it's like, so you guys have discovered how to create a dinosaur embryo, implant it in an ostrich egg using amphibian DNA, and you did it. You just did it, and you didn't have respect for it, and you just, like, it just happened, and now there are dinosaurs, and you don't really know what to do with them. You don't understand them as animals. You don't understand the genetic monsters you've created, because they're not technically the animals that existed 65 million years ago. They're genetic aberrations, right? Like, it's there's like a whole lack of respect thing there. That's all in the books, that you get, like, just these little snippets of it throughout the five movies that have come out so far. um but like, that, to me, that is what you're talking about when you talk about wonder, and it being like equal parts awe and terror. And to me, like, it's the true definition of the word awesome, right? Which,
Mhm.
like, we see the word awesome in the Bible a lot, and in certain translations. And it's not what, like, the early 90s cowabunga ninja turtles meaning of the word awesome has become, which I'm very fond of using. I love the word awesome. It's one of my favorite words. But it's like the true sense of the word. Like, when they see the Brachiosaurus, and us as the audience, especially in 1993, see that Brachiosaurus for the first time, it is it is truly awesome. It's this incredible, majestic creature that could kill you without even noticing. Right. So there's like this juxtaposition of like, wow, that's amazing. We're seeing a real dinosaur for the first time ever. What if it decided to attack us?
Mm.
Right. And then later on, it's like the raptor is born, and Grant's holding it in his hand, and he's so overtaken by the magic of the moment that it takes him way longer than it should to clock, what am I holding in my hands? And he looks at it, and everybody else has been talking, and Malcolm's like, oh, life finds a way and all that stuff. And he turns with absolute dread and is like, what species is this? Because he's realized that he's holding a velociraptor in his hands, right? I mean, technically it's a Deinonychus, but that's fine. We don't need to get into the finer points of the scientific inaccuracy in the Jurassic franchise.
Sure.
Actually, we will in a second, but
yeah,
we're not there yet. But that, to me, like, that's the dichotomy of the first Jurassic Park that I think the Lost World and Jurassic Park 3 maintain. And I think it's the piece that Jurassic World and especially Fallen Kingdom completely lose.
mm-hmm.
Where it's like, Jurassic World has a couple of cool moments, but they're not. Because I think when I think of Jurassic Park 3, there's the moment after like it's been harrowing, but everybody's back together, and we're gonna get off this island, and we're on the boat. All we gotta do is get to the water, and like if we can just make it to the outside of the to the edge of the island, we can figure out a way to get off of this godforsaken place. So we get this breather moment, and in that, like, they kind of come around a corner, and it like opens up, and we see the dinosaurs, and we see a bunch of the herbivores, right? And the music swells, and we get the Jurassic Park theme, and it's like this beautiful like story. I can't remember if I think it's sunset, right? Because a little while later the Spinosaurus attacks them at night.
Yeah. So
it's like sunset. So you got that beautiful golden hour glow to it. It's like it's majestic. That's the word for it. It's the perfect word for it. That moment isn't in Jurassic World, and it's definitely not in Fallen Kingdom. The closest we get in Fallen Kingdom is when the Brachiosaurus gets killed because the volcano erupts. And we get that moment of it like silhouetted behind the volcanic ash as it dies.
Right. Well,
and like, to me, that's why those movies don't work as well. It's what they're missing, and it's what makes the first 3 work for me, especially the original. Is that it's just like, it has, yes, it's scary. It's a scary movie at times, but it also is beautiful and amazing, and makes you like sort of look at yourself in the context of the larger world and that sort of thing. Like, like as not just an individual human being, but as a part of our ecosystem, and like what effect we have on the world and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Certainly at a young age, it impressed that upon me.
Right. Yeah. And it's so I'm going to make 2 points here, because to follow up, the first thing I want to say is I love that you pointed out that moment from Jurassic Park 3 where they are going down the river, and also all that river stuff was really cool because it connects. There's a lot of river stuff in the novel. Like, Jurassic Park 3 actually pulls out a lot of stuff from the novel that wasn't used previously. So it was just cool to see that, again, they found ways to take kind of the base story and bring it in. But that said, I love how you pointed out it is this majestic moment of wonder, which is exactly what this franchise is supposed to be about. Yeah. And even more than that, as they're at the beginning of Jurassic Park 3, as they're flying over the island, and they've duped Alan into thinking that they're going to pay a huge payout to continue funding his studies. Doesn't think a chance in hell they're going to land, right? It's just to fly over and look. And as they kind of make it into this open space, and you start to see, again, it's always the herbivores you see at first, which, to be fair, makes sense. Like, that's true of the animal kingdom today. Like, if you go on a safari, you're more likely than not going to see a bunch of like zebras or giraffes if you're in Africa, or if you
Yeah.
go to the Midwest, you might see some some buffalo, right?
Yeah.
See the grazers, the predators are hunting, they hide, right? So,
Yeah.
but in
Yeah.
that,
If you see a cougar,
run.
it's too late.
Yeah.
You're
Or
done.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, but even in that moment, right, it kind of does begin with the statement of wonder. Like Alan
Yeah.
looks down and even says, he goes, "My God, I've forgotten." And then the Jurassic Park theme starts, and
Yeah.
you see that delight on his face. As much as this place scared the crap out of him, he still recognizes the power of its wonder. And I would almost say that, like, and this is kind of a theme that was dropped at the end of Lost World, where you have that kind of closing little moment with John Hammond speaking to the media and ultimately saying, we need to respect their space, right? We
Yeah.
need to keep them isolated on the island. We cannot coexist, which is quite literally true, right? Like
Yeah.
we could not coexist with dinosaurs.
Yeah, like when he says like they require our absence,
Yes.
right? Which is such a beautiful line. Like I really like The Lost World, and it's an unpopular opinion. Most people will say that The Lost World's a bad movie. I think that people have a bad taste in their mouth because of the San Diego stuff.
Mm, yeah,
At the very end of the movie, which I think is unnecessary.
right.
I like it, but I think it's unnecessary for
I
the
mean,
story.
I think it's also like 10 minutes of the movie. Like it's very
Yeah,
short.
exactly. Yeah.
But
But like all of that to get that line is totally worth it for me, of like
absolutely.
his speech at the end,
Yeah.
which is just like because it is very much these ideas of ecology and like man was not meant to meddle. uh,
Right. Right.
that sort of stuff.
And it's a to me, it's like this nice reminder of respecting the space of respecting the space between the ordinary and the extraordinary, and that
Yeah.
they can't always fully coexist. And again, like I'm going to draw this back to a very Judeo-Christian concept, which in the Old Testament, in the book of I think it's First Samuel, when uh, Elijah is about to he asks to see God in God's fullness, and God's like, "You can't. You would die. Like it's too much for you. Trust me."
Yeah.
So all he gets to see is God walks by, right? So he sees God pass by. Because it's just way too much. In the Hindu tradition, there's the story in the Bhagavad Gita where Arjuna asks to see Krishna in Krishna's fullness. So Krishna like pulls back, like it's ultimately like pulls his face off to show Arjuna the fullness of his divinity, and Arjuna is nearly blinded and has to look away, right? Because again, it's the reminder that there will always be a separation between the divine and the created, the creator and the creature, ultimately, right? That you can't take it in its fullness. And I think Jurassic Park is about respecting that distinction. It's about respecting the distinction between the truly wonderful and our ability to exist within that space. We aren't, and tying this all into the, like what you were talking about with the, specifically more so in the novel, and it is brought into the movie with Ian Malcolm, the reality of, respecting creation and the power of creation, and the dangers of not respecting the
Yeah.
power of creation,
Yeah.
right? That ultimately we are creatures. Now, whether you are a person who believes in a creator or not, doesn't matter. We're creatures all the same, right? We are not pure creators. We cannot be, because we
Yeah.
are finite. That's
I've always interpreted made in his image as like what is the thing that defines us from the rest of the animal kingdom, and it is our ability to create, but we're a shade of God's ability to create, because well, like we put it into the book and it's like and at the beginning of the Bible it's like, and he did this in 7 days, and it's like, well, he didn't actually do it in 7 days. This is all metaphor, it's allegory, it's we're trying to boil down the concept of a deity that we can't comprehend creating the universe out of nothing. It's not, you're not going to fit it into the first chapter.
right.
you know it is such arrogance and hubris to think that that part of the text is literal. To me it's just like it is like that a human being could even begin to understand the complexity with which God uh, literally, for lack of a better way of describing whether you, like you say, whether you're Judeo-Christian, you believe in a monotheistic, hey, there's, God sitting up on a cloud swirling things and making people, or whether you're just like it's the force, right? Like it's
Mhm.
just, it's whatever it was that that was before or exists outside of what we comprehend, that that created the Big Bang, with like the know-how of like, I'm gonna do this one thing, and this one thing is going to spiral out into infinity and create human beings. Watch. Right?
Yeah.
Like the idea that like you say, like not respecting that ability of creation, because we have the ability to rub two sticks together and make fire, which is where it starts for humans, right?
Mhm.
Like evolutionarily speaking, it's like we managed to sit up on our hind legs so that we could free up our hands for tool usage, and then do stuff to start rubbing sticks together, making fire and weapons. um
I
yeah, like it's such arrogance to think that we're more than that, and that's the whole point of Jurassic Park. Like from the sci-fi perspective, that's the
yeah, yeah,
science
yeah.
fiction part of it.
Yeah, and there's that great line in Jurassic Park where Ian Malcolm says, God created dinosaurs, God destroyed dinosaurs. God created man, man destroyed God, man creates dinosaurs. And of course, Ellie's incredible follow up: dinosaurs eat man, woman inherits the earth.
Yeah,
Um, right, but again, Ian Malcolm just pointing out, right, that this is, I mean, he's ultimately saying is he's telling the story of the first sin in the book of Genesis, right? Which again, this is Judeo-Christian, I'm speaking of. The language of sin doesn't really exist in a lot of other religions, not in the same way, at least.
yeah,
But it's ultimately right that humanity's deepest flaw, and theologians have come to call it original sin. I'm very skeptical of that term, but all that to say, the initial flaw of humanity in its creaturehood is being discontent with your creaturehood, right? Trying to be at equal with the creator.
yeah,
And that's ultimately what Ian Malcolm is laying out right there: is this is how disrespectful this entire island is. This entire park is
yeah,
a huge slap in the face of accepting our space and our place in creation. um and again, I don't see Jurassic Park, either the movie or the novel, as a supreme indictment of don't be scientifically explorative. It's not
yeah,
doing that at all. It's just saying, again, be mindful, and I think it's a reminder of the need for some sense of moral compass within the world of science, right?
yeah,
In all my years of doing ministry work and teaching high school theology, a lot of times young people will ask, like, well, science and religion can't coexist, right? And it's like, no, they can. I mean, in a very simple, basic way, science can only ever answer the questions of how, right? How was it made? um where was it, the how and the where's, but what science will never be able to answer, and frankly, it's not really what science was created for, but science cannot answer why. That's why we have theologies, that's why we have philosophy. um that's where morality comes into the picture, and I think
yeah,
Jurassic Park's indictment of the scientific world isn't just a blanket indictment. It's an indictment of doing things without thinking of consequence,
yeah,
right? And yeah, like I just think, again, that's brilliant. And even and then to tie that back into the kind of the theme I like started a conversation with was, again, when we try to find wonder by recapturing something that no longer exists, it's going to fall apart,
hmm,
right? And again, I think of again, in the story of biblical narrative, this is the people of Israel when they finally get to the promised land and ultimately just try to redo everything that they've done before. It's like, no, you're
yeah,
trying to recapture something that's fallen apart, and it fell apart for a reason. Don't try to just replicate it. Evolve, right? Evolve. Do something new. And the same is true, I think, in a very human way in relationship. When something falls apart in a human relationship and then you just try to find it somewhere else or just rebuild it with someone else, it's like, well, no, that's not how it works. You have to evolve into something new now. um and I love that message from Jurassic Park is respecting the importance and the beauty of wonder, but also where are you getting it, and how are you getting it? Because that's important too, you know? Um, so yeah, I love those messages so much. And I'm totally going off on like a totally different avenue now, but this was a point I was going to make earlier when you were talking about that majestic moment from Jurassic Park 3. And to tie it all in is Jurassic Park was a movie that came out. I was 8 years old when this movie came out, and my favorite action figures to play with. I wasn't quite into Star Wars yet. I mean, I knew that Star Wars was coming into my worldview. It was kind of like it was like that asteroid that crashed into Earth that killed the dinosaurs. Like I could see it in the sky; it hadn't hit me yet, and totally unearthed everything else and made Star Wars the reign supreme love of my life. But when I played with action figures, for instance, like I was playing with Batman, I was playing with Ghostbusters, I was playing with Ninja Turtles mostly at that time. The idea of playing Jurassic Park doesn't really sound exciting, right? Like, oh, I run a theme park, I run a zoo,
Yeah.
But that movie, specifically the first one, was so wonderful. And obviously the early to mid 90s was an interesting times for toy making anyway. Star Wars changed the game on toys that could be made, right? Movies moving forward would always have a toy line. Well, for a time anyway. And when they released the Jurassic Park toy line, it was like, of course I have to have these. And just I'm bringing that in simply to say that even this movie itself elicited enough wonder in me that I wanted to play in that world. Right? There are a lot of really cool movies that are exciting and they're thrilling to watch, but you don't necessarily want to play, because ultimately for a child, playing is a way of interacting with that world. It's wanting to take part, be a co-creator in it, right? And Jurassic Park really did that. So I mean, I would play with my dinosaur action figures, and I would even go out into the woods behind my house with my brothers and some local friends, and we would play Jurassic Park in the woods, where some of us could be raptors and the other people were the people getting killed. We would chase down and try to hide and jump out and tackle you. And like, I think Jurassic Park, it did do this thing where it instilled in us again that the goodness of wonder and letting us play in that wonder. And I think that's such a huge attribute of what Jurassic Park brought into the world. You and I are pretty much the same age, if I remember right. I know we're a few years apart, but nothing drastic.
Yeah.
Did you play Jurassic Park when you had first seen that movie? Was that something you got into?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, all the time, at school and with friends. And yeah, I mean, I was Alan Grant for Halloween 2 years in a row in 1993, and then again in 1994. The year before that, in 92, I was Batman because the Batman movie came out, right? Like,
Sure.
yeah, I actually, it's funny, in the fourth grade, 94, I had a super soaker when the super soaker, oh my god, what was that line? It was the first time that they'd like gone away from like the classic super soaker shape of like the yellow super soaker with the green green like
Yeah.
screw in
Yep.
bottle. And it had a bottle that went on the top. It didn't have the rings around it, right? The bottle just went in on the top and like clicked like sort of left to right. Like you have to imagine it, the bottle is like the bubble, but instead of the nozzle whatever part coming out of like the end of it, it was like right in the middle of it. And so it just like kind of clicked onto the top of this, what looked like the shotgun from Jurassic Park. Right, the one that Grant uses unsuccessfully to shoot a raptor at point blank range, because he's not a marksman. And I popped the water tank off of it, and I took that thing to school on Halloween. Which, like, you would get kicked out of school, and I don't like, you would get expelled from school if you took something like that to a school nowadays. So I think about that all the time, where I'm like, I can't believe I did that. My parents let me do it.
Yeah.
And nobody cared. Like, the teachers didn't care because it was very clearly a super soaker,
Sure.
right? Like, it was like it was gray, but it was like a very light gray, like the gray of like an NES. And the pump action part. Well, I don't know what that's called, but the part of the shotgun that you pump, right? Like,
Yep.
and like the part of the super
Sure.
soaker that you pump for the pressure was like hot pink. It was like, because it was the 90s and everything was
Yeah.
neon colored.
Right. Of course.
But yeah, like, and it was just like I had a pair of white jeans and a denim shirt, and it wasn't a fedora. It wasn't like Alan Grant's hat. It was more like a floppy kind of Outback style leather hat that was part of like our costume box for playtime. And I took these three things and a handkerchief and put it around my neck and like, hey, I'm Alan Grant and I'm the hero from Jurassic Park. Not really like at the time understanding that like he's not really that type of character,
Sure.
but it doesn't matter because when something captures your imagination, it captures your imagination,
Sure.
and that's the end of it, right?
Yeah, and so actually this brings up another point. I was kind of, as my friend and I were talking back and forth a bit when we were, talking about the movie and the book, and you know, they were saying that they also preferred Jurassic Park 3 to Lost World, mainly because they were like, oh, I'm more of an Alan Grant fan than an Ian Malcolm fan. And I think Alan Grant, the reason Alan Grant is kind of considered the star of that movie, which I'd be curious to see how screen time breaks down. I mean, he probably does have the most, but it is very much an ensemble cast. But I think it sounds like, obviously you as a young person and so many others, I think the reason Alan Grant is kind of viewed as the hero of the story or the main character is because he is the one we see the wonder through his eyes the most, right? We get it from Ellie as well, but we really get it from Alan. He is every child that looks at a picture of a dinosaur in a illustrated book and is just like, wow, or walks into a natural history museum and sees those mammoth dinosaur bones reconstructed and just thinks, my God, that's amazing. That's Alan Grant on screen. He is our window into that world of wonder. And I think that's why he kind of became most people's favorite. He and Ellie both, because they are the ones that are filled with that wonder. And what's interesting when you look at where their characters are at the beginning of the third movie, Ellie doesn't seem to be involved in that world at all anymore. Now, I'm obviously speculating. We don't actually know. We're never really told what exactly she does, other than she's married to a high up, political person. I will
And has
say,
had two kids.
and has had two
It's
kids.
yeah.
Quick side
Yeah.
note, like it always bummed me out that those two didn't end up together. But that said, when she and Alan are having that conversation in the evening after dinner, she has really just held on to the terror of that experience, which certainly makes sense, right? Like I'm sure all of them had some level of PTSD after that weekend on the island.
Yeah.
But for Ellie, she has kind of just held on to the terror in such a way that and again, this is me, speculating, but her character has walked away from the wonder of that work and the wonder of that world, whereas Alan is still just as invested, right? He certainly respects the terror of it all, but also still is so filled with the wonder of it. Like when he's explaining to her how smart velociraptors are, which again, side note, that's pretty silly. No, they would have been as smart as primates. I don't know about that. There doesn't seem to be the scientific evidence to support that theory, but I get what they're doing. But all that to say, like, even in that moment, while Alan is certainly responding to her terror of like, yeah, we don't even know the half of how terrifying they could be. And yet, even in the midst of that terror is wonder for him, right? That even though that experience was probably the scariest thing he'll have ever had to deal with in his life, he hasn't lost the magic of it all. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, yeah, like yeah, he's still. That is in Jurassic Park 3. One of the most interesting parts is that like when he's giving his presentation, everybody just wants to ask questions about the park,
Yeah.
and then about San Diego, and he's like, I wasn't there,
Yeah.
but it's like he's still trying to figure out, like unlock the mysteries of these animals that lived 65 million plus years ago. And they're like, oh, but you've seen them, and he makes the point of like, no, those are theme park attractions. Like those are monsters for a, like for commerce basically. And that gets reinforced in Jurassic World when Dr. Wu is like, if we made these animals look the way that they really did, like people wouldn't believe it. They wouldn't pay to see them. They would think that we had done something wrong. And I think maybe it's in the Lost World, in the novelization, there's a bit about like maybe it's in the original Jurassic Park where somebody talks about like basically like they slowed down the metabolism of the larger herbivores because they were moving too fast.
Yeah, yep,
And like our perception of them at the time, like scientifically, because Michael Crichton was like on the cutting edge of paleontology when he wrote that book. It's now very, very far behind because science moves.
right.
um but at the time it was like the cutting edge, and a lot of the ideas, like the idea that dinosaurs evolved into birds, was not widely held. And even when Jurassic Park came out, like when the movie came out, it was considered like pop science, not real science. And now of course we consider it scientific fact, right? We have so much evidence to support it. Now that we know what we're looking for, it's like, oh, here's the multitude of evidence that it's scientifically classified. Birds are dinosaurs. There's a distinction in the evolutionary tree of like, we have non-avian dinosaurs, which are dinosaurs, and then avian dinosaurs, which are birds. And we don't know exactly when it splits, and there's a lot of missing links in there, but we have a good enough understanding that we know this stuff. And but we have that understanding now, but back then, back in the 90s, dinosaurs were still like the T-Rex that you saw in King Kong.
Yeah,
Right? I'm talking about like the original 1930s King Kong. They drag their tails on the ground. They're these slow moving, they live in swamps, blah blah blah, right? Cold blooded. They're just giant lizards, and they were depicted that way. And the book like sort of makes that point. And to me, it's like, I like the looking at it, and we just got the picture from Dominion where we're going to see an actual dinosaur with feathers in the next Jurassic movie. And there's a lot of speculation as to how that's going to come about, because it's a species we haven't seen in any of the previous films. But I but the understanding of the dinosaurs is changing in the films to match where science is at now, which is nice. It's good that they're finally doing it. It's taken them a lot longer than I think it should have. I think Jurassic World should have touched on this more. Like I said, there's like a line, but I think it should have been more a part of it. But people aren't ready for it as well, right? Like if you like Family Feud survey says, polled people about whether or not dinosaurs had feathers, you will get people who, and this is so interesting to me, it's so fascinating to me, you will get people who say dinosaurs do not have feathers. They didn't have feathers. Well, why do you think that? And they will tell you, because when I was a kid, dinosaurs didn't have feathers. And that's their logic for a scientific fact, right? We know that dromaeosaurids like Deinonychus and Velociraptor and Troodon and stuff, we know for a fact that they had some sort of feather, right? Whether they were proto feathers or like depending on where they are in evolution and in time, right? What era they're from, like they're different, but we know for a fact. We know this for a fact. We don't know all of the detail of it, like how many feather, like how big they were, what the purpose was. Was it just for cooling the body? Were they for display? Was it like a precursor to flight? Which of these dinosaurs could glide? Like which of them were part of the way towards achieving that? And like we know that like Archaeopteryx is literally like the first link that we have between like a velociraptor and a bird, right? We have science that shows us these very clear indicators, but people have a belief in what they already know, and they're not willing to move forward with that belief. And it's so similar to religion it to me, it's so fascinating. And Jurassic Park, it like kind of gets into it, but it never goes all the way into the hard sci-fi of it. In the movies, it does
Mhm.
more so in the books, in the two books. But I'm really hoping, I have high hopes and low expectations for Jurassic World Dominion, that they will actually start to sort of like within pop culture rewrite this. But it's been like, there's been a reluctance on the part of Universal to put feathered dinosaurs into the Jurassic franchise,
Yeah.
because they don't want people getting upset about it.
Right. Well, and and think of, I mean, that it makes sense specifically in our part of the Western world. I'm speaking of mainly the United States, but obviously it exists in Canada and I know elsewhere, but right, just the reluctance of people to accept facts. you know,
Yep.
I mean, we endured 4 years of fact hating morons in political power. Um, and and what's so funny is like, no, they didn't have feathers. Well, what are you basing that off of? Old science. So
Yeah.
it's the same stuff. It's
The children's book that I read when I was 8.
yeah, exactly.
Right? And it's like, that's not how science works.
Which was as
Yeah.
progressive as it got when you read that. But
Yeah.
you know what? It didn't stop there. you know, and that's the sad. And I love the analogy you're drawing here with that and that of religion. And I think, and again, I'm speaking primarily of Christian traditions, and this is obviously a blanket statement, so it's not. I'm ignoring the nuance, but right, as we learn more about who God is, or about who divinity is, because if we truly believe that there is a divine creator that interacts with creation, then we have to also presuppose that that creator is revealing stuff about themselves. And as they reveal themselves more and more over time, just as we do in our own human relationships, we learn more about them. So when you have religious dogma that comes to being challenged because the the people have new experiences that trump those or that transcend those, when the dogma won't stretch but becomes this hard cask that tries to hold on to things, it doesn't work. And literally, Jesus has a parable about that, right? You don't put new wine into old wineskins because it'll burst. You got to get some new wineskins.
Yep.
And I think that's a reality of even something like you're saying, like that the Jurassic Park franchise is even looking at is, are we going to just keep going off of the old things that the majority of people are comfortable with, or are we going to be willing to put out more truthful realities? And I love that they're doing this. I love it so much. Um, so yeah, like, and again, that's a great lesson for the way we look at religions. It just, it's not supposed to work that way. And years ago, on the Wampus Lair, Jason made this really silly but kind of profound point. We did an episode, cheapers, this was probably like 7 years ago, where we were talking about our thoughts on the special editions and subsequent changes with each release. The DVDs had something a little different than the Blu-rays, and then Disney Plus gave us McClunky, right? Like Star Wars is always kind of given these new things.
Yeah.
And Jason had this is something I love about Jason, is there's a real beautiful childlikeness to the way he sometimes thinks about these things. And I don't mean childlike in saying that he's stupid. I'm saying something quite pure. And he goes, sometimes I like to imagine that George Lucas really does think that the Star Wars world existed. And as he gets more and more information about it, he wants to go back and put that in. And I was like, I love that. Like, that's such a great thought. I mean, I know Jason doesn't literally believe that, but that was kind of his way of thinking is over years, George continues in his mind to live in that world he created, and he sees new things. So he wants to put those into the story. Right. And I think, now this will be like a great way to close this out, but because we're ultimately left with the question then, and this is where I think, in a very real way, our world exists right now, is the reluctance of conservatives to accept that life changes, that life evolves, right? And this is, I'm not trying to indict conservatives purely and simply, but the whole basis of conservatism is to conserve, to hold on to that which is and that which has come before.
Yeah.
And it's very reluctant to evolution, right? And I'm not trying to make this some political argument. That's not what I'm trying to get. I'm not talking about this from a political aspect. I'm just talking about it in the way in which we even exist. And I think there's something very basic in human beings in a lot of ways don't like change, right? Change is hard. So when things come to really challenge our worldviews, be it in the world of religion, be it in the world of socio-political realities, be it in the scientific world with dinosaurs having feathers, we get uncomfortable with things being different than the way we're used to. But you know what? That's how life works. That's how life finds its way, right?
It comes down to like what you'll hear a lot of scientists say, and this is like Neil deGrasse Tyson sort of sentiment, which is like science doesn't care what you believe.
Right.
Fact is fact.
Yeah.
Like gravity exists whether you believe in it or not. You don't have to believe in gravity. It is an immutable fact of reality.
Right.
And if you want to have a philosophical conversation about the confines of reality and, you know, like, are we living in a simulation, whatever, like we can get into that stuff. I'm sure one day we'll do an episode about the Matrix and we'll talk about this stuff. But like that's a different thing from like regardless whether or not, you know, God is controlling everything, some machines are controlling everything because we're just batteries to them, or what, or it's a combined unconsciousness, right? Like a communal unconscious reality that we create around each other. It doesn't matter. When I throw something up in the air, it hits the ground. The earth spins around and orbits the sun, and the sun orbits the galaxy. And there's a core to the galaxy, and the galaxy is moving through space, and there are other galaxies, and there's a potential for life out there somewhere. And by the way, there's more than two genders, and so many things that it's like that these are facts, but we've tricked ourselves into believing, and belief is the word for it, believing certain things about the world because it's more comfortable, it's easier
Mhm.
to hold on to a belief than it is to evolve and adapt as new information becomes available. It's very difficult for our brains to do it. We're 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 tuned to survival, and survival involves understanding our world in a certain way, categorizing stuff good, bad, safe, unsafe, right? Like this is why we have racism, it's why we other, it's why we have tribalism, like nationalism. All of this stuff is just out of a need for us to feel safe and secure. And for some reason, some people get it in their heads that science changing with new information is scary and dangerous.
Mhm.
And like you said, like it's not all conservatives, but it is certainly like there's a fundamentalist conservative contingent that is very much, don't change the textbooks. Please don't change the textbooks. I don't want to have to learn new math. I don't want to have to learn that dinosaurs had feathers. I want everything to be exactly the same way that it was when I was a kid. Otherwise, I might have to learn something and change the way that I feel about an old school commonly held belief.
Yeah.
And that stuff is scary. Change is scary, and I have empathy for those people, but I also don't have patience for it. If that makes sense. It's you can say like, yeah, I understand that's scary, and you feel that it's scary, but at the same time, I don't have time for it. Like let's move on. um the world is changing and evolving, and we all have to keep up,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
to paraphrase Dr. Grant.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a that's a great spot to wrap up this conversation. Again, there's obviously so much more we talk about, and I think that's the beauty of Jurassic Park. It's a story that is so full of wonder and insight, uh, that make us think outside and beyond just the thrill of a summer blockbuster. Again, it is that too, and it is good just for that, to give us the thrill of wonder. But it also opens up a lot of other great questions for us to sit with and to think about. So yeah, I think that's gonna wrap up this episode, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, we did it. We hit everything that I think we wanted to hit.
Yeah.
It's a good conversation. I think maybe we made a point somewhere in there or two. That's awesome. Let's give them a preview of what we're going to talk about next, because we decided this a while ago.
Oh yeah.
So we're not going to pull any 180s on this one, because this is a topic that you really wanted to talk about, and the second you said it, I was like, yeah, we're going to do that. You want to tell everybody what we're talking about on the next episode next month?
So 1996 was a huge year because it saw the release of my favorite ever summer blockbuster, Independence Day. And we are going to talk about aliens and alien appearances in movies, specifically in Independence Day, and what that means for us, and all the interesting aspects of alien religions that have sprung up in America since the 1950s. I did a lot of research on this when I was in college, so I'm excited to talk about it again. So we are going to look at
Awesome.
the religious world of alien abduction and alien experience, and how a lot of those tropes are kind of in a more silly fashion brought into Independence Day, but they are reflections of things that exist in our world, and I'm so
Yeah.
excited for that conversation.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it as well. Yeah, we'll be back in about in 4 weeks. That's the plan, to talk about Independence Day, and all that. But yeah, hope you guys all enjoyed our Jurassic Park talk, and our weird. We had a plan, and that's the surefire way to make sure that things don't go to plan, is to have one. But I think that it's been fun. These random topics have been good. I've really enjoyed it. Well, like I said, we'll be back in 4 weeks. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week with Amanda for a regular episode of Thunderquack Podcast. But until then, we'll talk to you guys next time. Metaphysical Fiction is part of the Thunderquack Podcast Network. Head to thunderquack.com for more great podcasts, or follow us at Thunderquack Pod on Twitter and Thunderquack Podcast on Instagram.